I blame a lot of this, of what we're talking about, on social media and the way that we eat information now. Obviously, brand recognition, keeping up with the Joneses has been around for forever, but I don't think it's ever been to this extent that we've seen in the technology age post 1999, where we are just constantly consuming and being marketed to in the form of, I would argue that 9 out of 10 of the reels that you laugh at on a daily basis are in some form marketing something to you, right? I don't think we've seen that in prior decades. And when that is constantly being absorbed, I think that we are constantly encouraged to buy things.
Who's this? Oh, you're an entrepreneur? Oh, you're a real estate investor. Oh, you're trying to learn from those who did it. Well, come into the lab then. Put your white coat on, gloves on, notepad, and let's build, y'all. In this episode, we take a different route. Typically, the folks that we have that come into this lab are really talking about offense, and a lot of offense, how to, get deals creatively, how to market, trust, you name it. But in this case, we have a special guest who she not only discuss the importance that of defense and the importance that all of us, regardless of what class we're in, whether we're lower middle class, upper middle class, and upper middle class, the top percentile, there's these foundations that we all need to account for in a world that is selling consumerism, right? Where we're just constantly being fed these ads on things to purchase, and how, again, the world of subscription model has completely added on in additional costs. Because on the other side of the house of the business, it's what I companies are evaluated under. It's based on how much monthly recurring revenue they're being. And on the other end, being the consumer of those, coming up with a plan to assure that you are not on the other side of being completely what I guess on the other side of basically handing your money hand over fist to these companies, and taking away from what I call your soldiers, your wealth soldiers, the ones that are going to help you generate the amount of income or have enough disposable income to then invest in these higher returning investments. And so this uh, uh, financial sector, because she does a bunch from wealth management to financial planning, etc., talks about the fundamentals that you are going to definitely want to implement in 2025, regardless of where you are in the spectrum. There is an opportunity to be able to save more, to invest more. And again, we know there's a lot of unforeseen costs that come with day to day. But one of the things we talked about is, if you can't handle your household right, what makes you think you're going to handle your business right? And how you do one thing is how you do everything. So it kind of humbles us to be back in the lab with Kendal. And you're definitely going to get a lot of insights that you can take away for your business, is following a blueprint that works. If one of the rules of that Warren Buffett talks about is, number one, don't lose money, number two, don't lose money, and number three, don't lose money, right? And a lot of us sometimes can be losing money, which is taking away from our investment power with all the knowledge that you learn here in the lab. So without further ado, we welcome Cann into the lab so she can give us the insights that we've long been waiting for, to make sure that our 2025 is certainly supercharged with the right defense to then win the championship. Let's build, y'all. Real estate experiment, Ruben here in the lab, and I am excited to have this long overdue conversation. This came from just mutual, I should say, the power of social media. I actually came across this individual's content, and there was a snippet that really caught my attention, which I'm going to pull up here in a second. But I think it's really important that we have this individual who's going to step into the lab with us shortly here. Just understand, when we think of having multiple tools on our tool belt, For us entrepreneurs and investors, there's nothing like having sound principles to learn from. And so, in this very specific instance, I'm very excited to have someone who not only walks the walk, or not only talks the talk, but also walks the walk. And I'm excited to unpack a little bit about her experience, how she got started, and how she even got on this path and this journey to then help others with their financial planning and then some. And it's turns out it's not just others; it's even going back to children's books as well, and tapping into and starting early. So, without further ado, with the early Q1 of 2025, there's no better other than Kendall. Cann, welcome to the lab. How are you doing today?
And good. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely, it is. It is. And so, Kendall, this is very interesting. I like to usually start the show in a few different ways. One is, um, typically, I like to travel, and I like to go to different sites and like to meet with the entrepreneurs, etc. And I always like to ask the question: if you and I meet, depending on where we're meeting, and I ask, what do you do for a living? What do you usually lead with, considering the background that you have? What do you lead with?
I mean, at the most basic levels, is what we do, I feel like is kind of confusing. It's hard to make an elevator pitch on something so complex. So I just tell people I help families build wealth and help entrepreneurs align their financial values on the personal side and the business side.
Personal and business. So I gotta ask you a question, because I always believe that when we lean into a business, there's either we're scratching our own itch or there's an opportunity that we saw. How did you stumble across this foundational pillar that we should be talking more about, that we actually don't talk about often, or maybe even later on in our journey? So what was your exposure to that first?
To investing,
Yeah, and let's
to
call it
building wealth.
financial literacy.
Well, I'm kind of an outlier, okay? So I would say I grew up in this world, and I thought everyone grew up in this world. So I have a
Mm,
dad who works on the institutional side for the last going on over 30 years, and he made it a point in our household to for basic financial knowledge. Like, we always talked about budgeting, we always talked about what things cost. There was Mondays where we'd pick stocks. There's 3 of us, 3 children in the household. We'd pick a stock on Monday, we'd have to watch what it did throughout the week, and on Friday, we'd talk about who won for that week, and every Friday, we talked about how we failed. We called it Failure Friday, and the point of that was to learn how to fail forward, right? So these
mm,
were constructive conversations we were having as long as I can remember. And we watched my dad, build wealth. We weren't wealthy. We lived in a 2-2, uh, okay neighborhood, and you know, I would say lower middle class. And I watched my dad make the commitment of, all right, I don't like this lifestyle. I want more. Whether it was for us or for himself, doesn't really matter. We watched him work his butt off
mm,
to build wealth. And, for the house we lived in and the life that we lived when I was 5 or 6 years old was vastly different than the life we did when I went to college when I was 18. And I witnessed that, right? I witnessed hard work. But exposure to this world started, I would say, 5 years old. I remember my dad reading me Barron's magazine and, teaching me words like stocks and buybacks and debt and financial statements. And I walked through life thinking that everyone was learning these things just like they were learning how to tell time and, how to write book reports. It wasn't until high school where I realized I'm kind of a nerd.
Do you? So, Kendall, this is interesting. What about before high school? Because I'm thinking you're learning this at 5, which is, and I think even if you started to learn this in high school, I still think you'd be ahead of the pack.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Considering the fact that it's crazy, even when you go to college, you might not even know how to do your own taxes, right? I mean, for Christ's sakes. But going back to the conversations outside of the house, versus inside? Was this always in a, oh well, guess just that's how my dad must be really into this, therefore that's why he's tucking us under his wing? Or do you start to realize that, do you start to have these conversations outside of school too, and then realize that you don't really have anybody to talk to about it? I'm just curious of that dynamic because I haven't experienced it.
So it's funny because I was embarrassed about what I knew or what I was required to know at home. So like when we'd have soccer parties, I played sports, I did art, I was in art classes. I wouldn't talk about it with my peers because you caught on very quickly that, what you're talking about wasn't cool, especially when you're like, in elementary, fifth, fourth, fifth grade. Like you're not really cool if you're talking about what you saw on CNBC last night.
Mm,
So what I found was when I was going to these birthday parties or, you know, s- pool parties, soccer parties, whatever, I would hear the conversations that, remember this is 08, 09, 010 time frame. I would hear the conversations the adults were having and I would comment on them. And at first I think it was funny, like who's this 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old that's, commenting on the economic times. Um, but as I got further along in high school, probably sophomore and junior year, parents would ask they would ask me to join the convert. They would invite me to the table and ask
mm,
my opinion. And that led to me having a couple of my friends' parents where, I'd go spend the night for the weekend and they'd bring their statements out or they'd bring their budget out. And be like, well, what'd you think about this? And then I started making a couple bucks here and there. And it was around that time I realized I can make money doing this. So it's from that point on, I went to my dad around at like 16, 17. I was like, I think I'm going to do this. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And he was like, great. And I compare it to, well, how I explain it to people. It was like someone who spoke Spanish taking Spanish. Like I never had that, that personal warfare. What do I want to be when I knew I don't
mm,
know how to do anything else, you guys. Like
mm.
this is it. So this is I never had to go through that internal dialogue of am I in the right field? I know how to do one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting about there's this thing about when we talk about finding your passion, which probably is another whole bucket of conversation, but is that feedback loop that you also get of validation that, oh, I'm doing something that these adults find worthy and I happen to be good at it. Why not lean into it more? It's almost like the thing where obviously you're not going to like something that doesn't give you results, but when you're able to get results for others and people are seeking your validation, especially as I have to say I'm impressed, if an adult is coming to you to look at their statements in high school, that says a lot about something that you may have said or they've seen you do, that to say, okay, I trust this kid. I mean, right? Is that like, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there was, if we're being honest, a
Hmm.
little bit of taking advantage of the situation, right? Because now I get paid a lot of money to do what I do.
Hmm.
So I imagine during that time, people still got paid good money to do what I was doing. So it's kind of like there's this kid that's just kind of like a freak that knows this stuff. I can pay her, you know,
Pennies on a
150,
dollar.
200 bucks
Yeah.
for 20 hours of work while she's sitting here like with my daughter hanging out.
Mm,
But it was such as you were saying, it was such a great feeling of validation to have this skill set, to feel different, to feel wanted, to feel appreciated. Um, it was great for my confidence, as a girl
mm,
in high school. That's something that's hard to find is confidence for a lot of us. So it was refreshing. It gave me validation, and I immediately, almost immediately, when I went to Tallahassee to go to FSU, I wanted to recreate it. Right, I didn't have my friends' parents to give me beer money at FSU. So what I did
mhm,
was I created these shitty little business cards at I think it was Vistaprint or one of those printing places, and I would go to all the Books a Millions are the ones that were in Tallahassee, and I would put them in the personal finance books, and I'd go back, like, once a quarter to, like, refresh, and I realized that Dave Ramsey at that time, I believe he had recently released his Total Money Makeover book, and so I was like, "I should read this, right? If it's selling like hotcakes." And, through reading that, it was very obvious to me, at least, that he had within his baby step program, a portion of his process once people got to a certain step was to refer them out to a financial advisor because it was time for them to start investing. And so I decided I want to be one of those financial advisors. So I built my business around his brand and
Mm.
what he stands for. And pretty quickly into becoming licensed, I applied to be one of his endorsed professionals, and that's how I built my practice, was
Ooh.
getting referrals through through Dave Ramsey's program.
Okay, I love that you went there, and I'm gonna bring this one back because I'm a huge believer having mentors and standing on the shoulders of giants and having strategic relations. But I want to go back for a second to what you had mentioned, because you mentioned that you realized that talking about this wasn't necessarily cool, and I want to highlight, I want to put a, create a bridge here, because you bring up Dave Ramsey as well. And speaking of fitting in, if you fit in, this is one of the statistics that I stumbled across on your Instagram, where you mentioned that 7 out of 10 live paycheck to paycheck. I think this came out in like 2022. You had mentioned
Mhm.
60%, 60%, 63% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and we have this whole thing about consumerism, etc. Talk to me about, okay, great. So if we want to fit in, that's like a, for me, that's a crazy statistic. And then I think you even doubled down on it. You mentioned 53% of people can't overcome like an emergency that costs more than like $1,000. Is that right? Is that like, am I getting some of this right?
You're in the range. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds
And I
right.
was like, what? So if we want to be cool with the masses, that's kind of what we're facing, which to me, I'm like blown away when I see that. But this is data, right? Like, men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. What's your take on that? Like, what's this whole thing with, what's the fundamental issue here with quote unquote fitting in the masses? What's the issue? What's the disconnect? Is it lack of financial literacy? Is it too much spending? Like, where do we even, how do we even unpack this statistic?
I blame a lot of this of what we're talking about on social media and the
Mm,
way that we eat information now. I obviously brand recognition, keeping up with the Joneses has been around for forever, but
sure.
I don't think it's ever been to this extent that we've seen in the technology age post 1999, where we are just constantly consuming and being marketed to in the form of, I mean, I would argue that 9 out of 10 of the reels that you laugh at on a daily basis are in some form marketing something to you, right?
Mm,
I don't think we've seen that in prior decades. And when that is constantly being absorbed, I think that we are constantly encouraged to buy things. And reading the studies, creating content around those studies is one thing, but I see it in my office every day where I have families that come in that they have one, like I said, so one of them owns a profitable small business and one has usually a high paying W-2 job.
hmm
So let's say they're bringing in their household bringing in over $200,000 and they're living paycheck to paycheck because they feel like they need to send their kid to private school because they believe public schools are poisoning their children's minds. And then we live in a day and age of convenience, especially post COVID. So now they have a DoorDash budget line item.
hmm
They have an Amazon budget line item. But good God, they gotta have Netflix and Hulu and Apple and all of the different things at one time because shows, I mean, there's just so in the era of the subscription model
Mm.
also has that
It'll
alone,
sneak up on you.
everything we buy now is a subscription. And that I would say increases just your personal household intake well over 30%
which is
than
which
before.
is phenomenal, because it's, as I know it on the other side of the house, subscription model businesses are great business because it's MRR, monthly
They're
recurring
great.
revenue, which is great for evaluations of an exit, because you're like, oh, you're being a recurring business. So that's why a lot of these car washes are actually turning into memberships. I have one.
Everything is.
Isn't that
Everything
crazy?
is.
But so, do you think, Kendall, could it possibly be that it's also, because one of my mentors talks about okay, there was the industrial era, right? Then there was or sorry, the agriculture era, then it was industrial, then it was text, etc. And you mentioned this 1999. I think reading the innovations of Steve Jobs. He said the I think iTunes had like 3 billion, or not, the App Store had like 3 billion different applications that you could pick from. So could it possibly be like we've never really lived in a day and age where there's so many products that are readily available from a click of a button, and on the other side there's never been a day and time when there's so many solutions to our problems, and whether they're good or bad products, there's a price to pay for it in order to increase our quality of life. Now I'm totally neutral here. I'm more of a on the business side because I like providing solutions and providing services. But do you think it's a combination of that, or do you solely think that no, it's because now before you used to watch a few commercials on TV, and now that you have this thing, your life is surrounded by commercials and it's tapped into your subconscious mind, and therefore it reinforces that buy mentality. I mean, which one is it? Could it be both? What are your thoughts on that?
It has to be a cocktail of both, but a cocktail of both. But for me personally, because we
Mhm.
all see the lens through our own personal experience, we interpret life that way. Um, I believe it is the speed in which we are marketed to.
Mm.
I believe that there's a reason why our ability to stay focused has decreased as a society, probably even more so in our country if you're, or developed countries. We take in and are being marketed to so much more that it's only human. It is a biological response to buy more shit that we don't need. And I fall for it all the time. I have a new rule in our house that anytime we start a subscription, we have to fire a subscription of the same,
Mm.
of the equal value. So if we're gonna get a new gym membership, I gotta go get rid of 3 subscriptions to make up for it. Because it takes, on average, I'm seeing people that have $150,000 in income, that it's taking them about $7,000 to live the not this is a lifestyle without them having any boundaries or rules or restrictions. That's crazy. How are you supposed to retire if it takes you $7,000 a month to live your life? I mean, that means you're gonna have to work longer. It means you're gonna have to potentially stay in a job that you're not happy with for longer because you're making decent money, but you gotta be able to retire. You gotta be able to support yourself. There has to be a shift.
Mm.
I'm not sure what that shift is gonna be, but I do believe that, I mean, recessions are part of investing. We are long due for a recession. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen. I think a lot of the way that we do business and the way we consume business is going to shift at that point, because all that's happening now and over the last 30 years is we have an elimination of the middle class. We just have the haves and the have nots. And that gap is just getting bigger and bigger
Yeah.
due to the
So
way that we consume.
Kendall, do you think your message is this for everyone, or is it for I'm rooting for the and it's funny, as I'm asking this question, I'm looking at 63% of Americans. So then it's like we're talking to the bulk of people regardless of where they are at. You're saying if they make more, they spend more. It's all relative. Is that right?
Yep. That is the problem, that we are not seeing people save at the same rate at which their wealth grows. We are seeing them spend in direct correlation to what they make, which is
Mm.
great if you are a business owner. But the reality is not everyone is meant to be a business owner or an entrepreneur. We still need people to have W-2 jobs and work 9 to 5s, but it's becoming increasingly more difficult for those people to survive.
Yeah. And I will say at the end of the day, it's almost like the Pareto principle, right? It's like for all these businesses that are out there, the top percentile, just like anything, the lion's share of the wealth is distributed in the smaller percentage, which makes everybody else consumers and the other ones just smaller businesses. So okay, I'm hearing you right now. I have your attention. If I'm listening to this, I'm okay. Well, I have a 6-figure income. Like she ain't talking to me. Wrong. let's have a look at your cost of living. You mentioned, why don't we lean into there for a second? Like, what is the common denominator, you would say, regardless of uh, what do you call it? Financial class? I apologize. I'm trying to think of, like, when we say middle class, is that like, is that kosher to say that? Like, what do we call that?
It's so hard to even define that group these days. Where I live, middle class would be you're pulling in six figures. Like you make $100,000 for your home. You own a
Uh-huh.
home.
Yeah.
Um, you've got a mortgage. You've got, hopefully two incomes. That you mean it's hard to now have a stay-at-home wife in the middle class, right? Like that whole American, you know, stereotypical view is kind of almost a dying dream at this point. If you have a
Mm,
stay-at-home spouse, I mean, you're making it and you're not
yeah.
struggling. Like that's something to be proud of. Um, yeah, so I would say that's the middle class, at least in my bubble in the state of Florida. You're making 100K in a household, you own your home, and everyone has their own bedroom.
So that's 100K household. So for context, that's man makes 50K, woman makes 50K, or whatever partnership you have in your household. That's two adults, considering that their wife, husband, or partners are bringing in 50K piece. Is that right?
Yep. I believe the last statistic that I saw, I'd have to look it up, but I think the average wage is around 50K. That's like the mean salary in our country most recently that I can recall.
Yeah, that
So that
sounds.
means if you have
Yeah.
two people that are making that, you're pulling in around 100K gross.
Got it. So then we shift over and let's say, okay, great. So now we're in the second tier. What's the tier above that when we talk about, because six figures can range anywhere from 100K to 900K. So what do you think is this? Not think. I'm speaking to the expert here. Based on your data, what do you see is the, like, the next jump up that someone might say, okay, well, maybe that's not me, but what's the next tier up? Would you say?
So I would say that the next tier is pretty big jump. So I would say
That's crazy.
upwards of 175 to 200K is where you're going to see a little more. Hmm, like a breath of fresh. You have two cars per household consistently. This is at the point where if one spouse is able or one partner is able to bring in that type of income, you will see a stay-at-home parent a lot of the time. These are again the people that are coming in my office that I'm meeting with. You'll also start to see private school more frequently. Um, in our area, in our county, we have really great public schools, but we still have a huge population of private schoolers. In Duval County, however, that is the county next to us, we have poorer public schools and we have a huge resurgence of the private school charter school um,
Model.
just group of people. And that's
Mhm.
typically that's where you're seeing, and that's also why you're seeing a lot of people in that income bracket, that tax bracket. They're still paycheck to paycheck because you're seeing them pay, tuition prices to send their kids to
That's
elementary school and
crazy.
middle school.
Okay. This is interesting. So let's start from the bottom up. Well, actually, I don't. I think there might be. So I'm fascinated by this. I want to share this with you because this is. I love this conversation. I'm so happy you're here. So third tier, apparently, um, what is that third tier? Because I've heard some things around. I heard a statistic. I can't even source. I can't even remember where I sourced it from. I think it was from one of my mentors, Martin Golden. He had said something like, "You'd be surprised what the top 5 percentile in America are." You're thinking like the billionaires, etc. No, 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 no. It's actually right. They're not even scratching a million apparently, which was mind-boggling to me. What's the number? What's the next jump after the 175 to 200K based on what you've seen?
Yeah, so I would say when you see people pulling in around 500K, give or
Mhm.
take $100,000, those are the upper tier. Those are I would call them the mini millionaires. They're living like millionaires for sure. And this is where you are. Like where I'm
Yeah.
at in Florida, you can live really, really well
Yeah.
compared to like if you were to make the same amount of money and be in even Atlanta. I
Mhm.
mean, so like for example, I own several houses here in Duval County.
Good for you.
I own a 3-3 long-term rental. It's a single family home. It's got a fenced in backyard, and I get 1,800 bucks a month for it.
Hmm.
You're not gonna find that in Atlanta.
Yeah. What is the overhead on that? Just so curious. I'm sorry, you're pulling me into my world now. What's the mortgage on that?
Mm. What's the mortgage?
Or do you
It's paid
not do
off.
mortgages? Oh, see, I knew. Okay, so I should have known better. You're coming from Dave Ramsey's world, which I want to tap into later
Well,
on with you. So I should have
so I
expected
agree
that it
with
was paid off.
90% of what Dave Ramsey says. Like, and also that I'm an outlier there. My husband played in the NFL, and my
Yeah.
rule when he was in the NFL was every year you played, we will buy a real estate
Mm,
property. So we just didn't take mortgages out on them,
yeah. You're
but
like
the average
your
person will.
reaction was
So,
for those of you who are listening, Kendall's reaction was so funny, and this just shows you the paradigms that we have, like which I want to talk about. I don't want to save for later, but as investors, like in my mastermind group, in my circle, it's definitely smart leverage at all time, even if you can. And when I said mortgage, I feel like you nearly got uh almost nauseous.
no, I didn't get nauseous because I am,
You're like,
and this is
what's
where
that?
Dave Ramsey and I divide. I
Okay.
believe that leverage is a part of being a business owner. It
Hmm.
really is. And learning how to use it separates the mom and pop shops from the people that are going to franchise or they're going to have a scalable business. Now, is it terrifying? Absolutely. Do you get used to it over time? Absolutely. I was just in a position where if the NFL stands for not for long, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So from at any given time in the NFL, you can go from making millions to making nothing because you got a bum knee now.
Yeah,
So
100%.
debt was a little scarier
No, it's
for
smart.
us.
You did it the right way, and I'm half joking. I'm just having a good time with you. But it's funny that so let's go back. So we're talking about the base, middle class. We're saying about 100K. Then we're saying a little. I think that's right, right? And then upper middle class.
Mhm.
We're saying closer to 175 to 200K, and then we talk about the upper echelons a little bit more closer to like the 500K. Is that right? Um,
Mhm.
I want to just start from the bottom up, almost like the way you would see like um when you look at speaking of consumerism, you look at a product and it's like, okay, you have product A includes what, or product B includes what product A has, and product C includes A, B, C, right? So I want to go over the foundations of like, what could all of these classes, when you look across horizontally, you say, Ruben, all of these guys and gals could all benefit. I think you mentioned it. You mentioned memberships, but I don't want to go into detail. They could all benefit from at least having some sense of awareness on X. Like every time I look, Ruben, whether you're in the middle class, whether you're in the upper middle class or upper middle class, they you need to get your bearings on this item or these items. What comes to mind first?
Know your lazy number.
Mm,
So this is not a political term or a proper term. That is one that I made up. So
please do elaborate. What does that mean?
you need to take inventory. I hate using the word budget because people, when they hear budget, they think restriction or I'm in trouble or restrictive. But we're
Sure.
going to use it for the sense of familiarity.
Mhm.
You need to have a budget or at least take inventory of what you are spending. No restrictions at first. Just get an Excel out and look at your recurring expenditures. You don't have to look at the whole year. Just look at the last 2 months, three if you're feeling smart. Take out inventory. Now, look at what you're spending on things your sole purpose is convenience. So that is like your delivery apps, your Instacarts, your mobile detailer that comes and washes your car, the apps like Poplin that come and pick up your laundry and do your laundry for you. You need to know that number.
Mm.
More than likely, that number is going to make you disgusted with yourself when you first see it. If you dig deeper after, let's say you do that and you do it and you're like, oh, I'm disgusting. Now, look at how much you're spending on food. Food.
Yeah.
Lump it all together. Lump eating out, my boyfriend just broke up with me and then I ordered a carton of Ben and Jerry's and I ate the whole thing. on Instacart, your DoorDash, lump it all together. And then if you want, you can separate it out and set boundaries. If on nothing else, set boundaries only on that category.
Can you define? So we hear you loud and clear. So far, I hear budget is the fundamentals of a budget is tracking. Would you say that that's half the battle, that people are just not even tracking? They're just swiping.
Yeah, just track it.
Uh-huh.
Don't at the first 3 months of the budget the likelihood of you following through your inventory list of your expenditures is
Mhm.
just slowly finding where you're comfortable, tracking it for the first 3 months. And once you get 2 months that look similar, then set your first ground rule. And the first ground rule you set for yourself, and this applies to just most households, is food. So in our household, for example, I'm going to pick on myself. We were spending about $4,000 a month on food.
How many kids?
Food. Two. They barely eat. It was us. It's
She
not
says
even
it
them.
was us. Kendall, you kill me.
They're on a
That's
beige diet. They eat carrots, chicken fingers, and potatoes.
okay. So that's about 1,000 a piece. But you're saying you guys have the bulk of that. So
Mm,
that's a lot.
easy.
And by the
Yeah.
way, I can attest that it's crazy. I see it too. Which we'll talk about inflation in a second. But um, okay. So Kendall, I hear you. Do I need to eat less? What are you telling me here?
The first place you can start
Mm-hmm.
before, you get all hard on yourself is just change where you grocery shop. So for example, I hope I don't get sued for this, but we were shopping at exclusively Publix because that is what is close to us. And we were
Mm-hmm.
using Instacart and I hadn't been in a grocery store for, 2 years at one point because we just Instacarted Publix every time we needed groceries. When I started taking inventory, I just said, "Okay, maybe Publix really is expensive. Let's go try and grocery shop somewhere else." We grocery shopped at Trader Joe's 2 times, and it cut our grocery bill in half. So
Mm.
now, and I'm not even exaggerating, in half. We were going from $500 to $600 a week. We were shopping at Publix and Costco. And then we said, all right, no more Publix and Costco, no more Instacart. We're going to go to the store once a week as a family after church, and we're going to go to Trader Joe's in half, cut in half. That little change right there was enough to get our grocery bill down to a more tolerable level. If it did it for us, I'm sure it could do it for anybody.
Yeah.
So it might just be as simple as changing where you're shopping, first tracking, second changing where you're shopping, and watching what you're buying. So grocery shopping is an art. I've learned that in my adulthood. We buy what we are going to eat and nothing else. We don't buy a bunch of snacks. We don't buy meat that's going to go bad. We freeze our meat almost as soon as we get it so that it doesn't go bad. We were wasteful grocery shoppers, and I found that a lot of people are.
Mm.
And also cooking more. Your crock
Yeah.
pot is your friend.
Experiment Nation, you've heard me talk about how multiple investors across the nation are landing these lucrative midterm rental insurance contracts by making these small tweaks on the branding and marketing side, especially if you're an existing short-term rental operator. There is a quick and easy shift that you can make with the right guide in place. And because we've launched a 2-day boot camp that not everyone could attend in real time, I've put together a recording where you can get all the materials and all the guides to focus on rebranding either your short-term rental business or your current midterm rental business so that you can actually have the insurance companies reach out to you. And then day 2 is if you want to actually play offense, how you can reach out to them by listing on the right platforms, etc. If you're looking to get this MTR bootcamp so that you can start optimizing and you can start receiving these lucrative contracts that again provide less headaches, less turnovers, unlike the Airbnb space, you can start receiving inquiries today by having the right guide in place. So please go to Experiment realestate.com/MTR bootcamp, or click the link in the bio to make sure you get your hands on the midterm rental insurance bootcamp to fast track your way into landing these lucrative insurance contracts the exact same ways multiple investors have taken advantage of this unknown and untapped niche within the midterm rental umbrella. Yeah. So it's interesting, because one thing that a listener might be thinking is, well, not all, we shop for quality, just like one would indicate that, well, we're trying to send our kids to the best schools. What do you have to say to that?
I buy 100% organic,
Hmm.
and I still got cut in half. I
Okay.
also started a garden and bought chickens. I will say buying chickens was not cheaper than just buying the cage-free pasture-raised
Yeah.
eggs, but that's for
actually,
another
I actually
podcast.
talked my folks out of their chicken. I literally did the P&Ls for them. Like, you guys are actually operating at a
It
loss.
actually makes
But
no sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
just with all the labor and all that. That's
Yeah,
funny.
I did it.
So budget is one thing, food is second. Uh, would you put going to restaurants under the food umbrella, or is that a whole nother section that's unpacked here? Because I can say from experience, the restaurants, like Kendall, I got to tell you, we lived in New York for the past decade, and my wife and I talk about this all the time. You eat for with two people, God forbid you want wine, then you have 25% gratuity, you're automatically scratching $200, which is crazy to think about. Or at least 160 for gratuity. Let's be honest. If it comes down to 140, 25%, you're like at 170 ish. Does that, I mean, that sounds
I
crazy, right?
don't have an answer that people are gonna that people are
Yeah.
gonna like.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I think
it's
I'm highlighting how expensive it can be. And if you don't keep track of that, and you go out 4 times a month, that's $1,000.
so what I have seen work for people is we
Mm-hmm.
separate groceries, we separate eating out,
Mm-hmm.
and eating out is not fancy. So we're talking for a family of four, your meal should be under $75. So like that's not fancy. That's your Zaxby's or your like Chick-fil-A. And then you have a date night. I would also encourage you should not be taking your kids to fancy restaurants where your meal is going to cost more than $30 unless you are in the upper echelon. There's no reason your kid needs steak. There's no reason they need a steak at a 3 or 4 star restaurant unless you can afford to do that. But we're talking about the people that are living paycheck to paycheck regardless of how much money they make. There's going to have to be some sacrifice somewhere, right? Like we see so much on social media, at least I see it, my algorithm likes to show me it, of these hacks or these, and those exist. But the reality is, we as consumers in this culture need to make some sacrifices, some changes. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to come without sacrifice. So it's going to mean going out to eat maybe a couple times a month instead of every weekend, or
Mm-hmm.
going out for drinks maybe a couple times a month instead of every single weekend. I don't think people want to hear that because,
Yeah.
that's what's cool to take pictures and do, but it's destroying our finances in this country and contributing to the overall credit card debt.
Do you think it's so? Do you think for these, we talked about budget, we talked about food and restaurants. Uh, was there another one that I think we started with this? You talked about subscriptions. Is that the next tier for you? Because I'm looking across the board. All these are the same. Whether you're middle class, upper middle class, you're saying that these foundations are true. I'd love to hear what, if some become more truer for other verticals or classes, for lack of better words, and then kind of leaves the others behind. Did we cover the main foundation, or is there another one you want to drop in there for us?
I would say subscriptions is a big one because,
Mhm.
I mean, we've talked about it a little bit already. On the business side, as business owners and people who eventually want to exit and sell their businesses, people that are buying businesses, private equity or angel investors, or just people that have cash, they want to see recurring revenue in the form of subscription. So you're seeing
Mm,
HVAC people have maintenance contracts where you're paying monthly for them to come service your unit. You're seeing property manager or not property managers, home inspectors who are now offering home maintenance contracts where they'll come annually to make sure like you're keeping your house up to date and doing what you need to do for everyone is trying to create these subscription-based service contracts, especially service providers, to so that you're paying and they have a continuing stream of revenue. Now on the consumer side, you got to fight that, right? You got to find the people who are not offering that because you are paying more by not paying as you go. So, there's this dilemma that as consumers, we have to know how first we have to understand how the market is changing, how services are changing, and we have to decide what we can afford to do and whether we want to partake in it. So, subscriptions for people that are really trying to cut, I would tell them you use one streaming service at a time. All right. You want to have Hulu this month, you got to cancel the Netflix. Okay. You want to have what's another one? Apple TV
Hmm.
this month, you got to cancel Peacock. You got to interchange these things. And there's no shame in that. I mean, there's constantly service or breaks that they are offering you to sign up for them with them again. What's another one that I see so often? A budgeting app. Budgeting apps. I mean, I offer a budgeting app and it's $7 a month,
Hmm.
but you can do it on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Mine's on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. It's interesting because you brought it back full circle. One thing I want to comment on, and I'm sure you would agree with me, is that a lot of these monthly subscriptions are made to be very affordable that you wouldn't really notice. And if you don't keep inventory, you're like, oh, I've been paying for this for 3 years and I only use it like
Mhm,
5% of the time, which it's a very subtle uh thing that can not be so subtle if you don't keep the inventory. So one of the things subscription models you gotta look out for is the fact that you might be subscribed to something you don't even use anymore. And I think that's the big risk, and I'm glad you brought up some of those apps because I think that, again, speaking of technology, being able to leverage that to fight that battle of I've seen a few commercials. I don't personally have it because I do my inventory on a um, monthly inventory as well, so we kind of see everything that's going in and out. But otherwise, there's these commercials of folks of, do you know how much you're spending? They guess and they're completely off, and it's like, nope, this app just pulled all these other memberships that you have that you're currently not using. So
mhm,
again, I don't have any affiliation. I don't even know what the name is, but I've seen a few of those, and I think just finding a solution, it sounds like, with the budget is going to also solve and cure that subscription problem. And I love that replace and interchange, because that'll keep you honest, right?
mhm. Well, even what you just said, that app that you're talking about is a subscription model that cancels your subscriptions. So,
Yeah.
they're just
Uh,
that
uh,
brings it full circle.
there you go. Right. To solve a pick your poison. But okay, so I want to talk about a little bit. So we've covered the base there. I'm curious, what do you see? Let's talk about those who have mastered this, right? Because I'm sure there's not all clients are created equal. So let's go on the other side where, you know what, these guys are not doing these things, or they're doing this and or more maybe. What is it that you're seeing on the upper echelons of folks who have, for lack of better words, mastered their financial, um call it, health? And what do you see are some common denominators or trends that we can pick up and learn from them, aside from the foundations of what we just discussed?
They take inventory biweekly
Mm,
and they turn it into like a dinner date where they get a bottle of wine, they make dinner for each other, they get a sitter for the kids, and they look at it biweekly. So they're killing two birds with one stone. They're cutting down on their restaurant costs. Both parties, keyword, both parties are aware and they are on the same page about the end goal. This is what we're trying to get under. This is what our 1, 3, 5, and 10-year goal is. This is why we're doing this, and we're in it together. I would
that is
encourage
so
people
important.
to get on the same page with their partners. Even if you just started there, you're ahead of the most of the people I talk to. So often, the people I'm meeting with, you have one spouse that realizes that this is really important and it's the contributing factor to whether or not they make it to the next throughout the next 10 years to hit financial milestones like sending their kids to college or retirement. and then you have one that's like not really into it. Like that almost always fails.
Wow. You know, it's fascinating because we don't, you know, talk about it enough, but you would almost think that's something that should come before people get together, right? Like you would almost think that that's like a checkbox that maybe isn't really talked about enough. It's like, oh, we like each other. Let's do this life thing together, and then we don't really have this financial conversation. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, I think you just said it, but like, do you see that to be a fundamental conversation that's not being had that one should consider having if someone's listening and they're thinking about being with a partner?
So, one thing I offer to all of my clients who have adult children or children in this age range is I offer for free to sit down with them and their potential spouse.
Mm,
Or if they're just coming out of college and they're sitting, they're about to go to their first big kid job or adult job out of college, I will sit with them and because I want to model to them one what the correct relationship with a financial professional should look like, especially when it comes to helping you plan for your financial future, but also so that that conversation is normalized. So I can tell them, "Hey, these are conversations that you need to be having with a potential
ooh,
partner or a serious relationship that you're coming into. It is not taboo if you've been dating someone for a year and you're over the age of 22 to talk about finances. If you don't know whether your significant other has debt and you are engaged, that is a terrible thing.
wow.
That is that if someone is sitting in front of me, and this has happened several times where a client's like, you know what, that's a great idea. And I sit down with them and I ask, okay, what debt does your partner have? Talking to Tommy, what debt does Cynthia have? And he has no idea. That is that is a red flag. That is a
Okay,
conversation you need to have.
that is so good because it so this seems probably very organic to you, I would say, because you had those conversations in the household that it was almost normalized. Um, and it feels like there's maybe this weird okay, we're not gonna learn financial literacy in college. We're It's probably not cool to talk about it when you're 5. Wasn't cool in high school. Not so cool in college. I guess we can talk about all this debt, but at a high level. Oh, college debt. And then it kind of like, oh yeah, welcome to adulthood. And by the way, I've never even, I don't, we don't even, like, we have a culture, Kendall. Maybe you can help me bring this home. Why don't we talk about money, right? Like, I come from a different world in entrepreneurship where it's very like, hey, by the way, like, what are you grossing? What did you make? Sales, right? Salespeople are like, too, like, we hit our quota, etc. But then you get into this other side of the world where maybe you're like W-2 employee, and it's like, God forbid you ask someone how much they make. And I have this conversation with my wife all the time. I'm like, I am so curious. Like, I love the, hey, what do you do for a living? How did you build your wealth? Like, how did you make it? Like, because I'm curious. But it's almost like this taboo thing, and it's almost to our, it comes back to bite us. But it almost seems like systematized. Like, what is your thought on that? This whole financial literacy. Let's not talk about it until it's too late. Almost like, what's the deal here? Help me out.
I think that I'm typically a pessimist, but I'm going to be an optimist in this situation. I really think that is a problem that is solving itself. And
Okay.
we give social media a bad rep because it is mostly bad, in my opinion, but it also has spread good information. And I think people like me who are on the platform or other people who have a much larger following than me, they're
Mhm,
spreading knowledge that might not always be correct, but it's the fact that that content is getting in front of you, it's becoming more comfortable to speak about in your social circles.
mhm.
Our parents, it was very unusual for my dad to be that open with their finances with his
Right.
kids at such a young age. Very unusual. But I think our generation understands, especially with how expensive things are, with the cost of living, with inflation. I think they understand that they almost have to address these things with their kids. They almost have to talk about have these hard conversations with their kids to protect them. Otherwise, your kid is going to be 30 years old living with you if they don't understand money.
Yeah,
Things are more expensive and
yeah.
we don't want that as parents. We want them to blossom and flourish and go out and create their own lives. So I think that that problem is slowly solving itself. I think
Mm.
how we can what we can do a better job is talking to our parents about it. So
Mm.
I can learn so much by how a young person is going to handle money or what struggles they're going to have if they're just starting out by how their parents handle money.
That
So
okay,
that's the
that's
biggest
interesting.
thing.
Okay, so are we talking about like this is so interesting. Are we talking about we see how it was done, therefore we do as they've done? Is that where you're going with that? Or is that are you talking
It
about more the
can be that.
relationship with
Here's an
money?
example. Here's an example.
Yeah.
If your parents fought a lot, and a lot of the times fighting in the household is about money, a lot of times that kid is gonna be a spender growing up.
No
They're
way.
going
Really? Is that
to
like a
they're going
psychological
to
thing?
I don't know, it's just what I see, and I see it a
Wow.
lot. So, you're gonna see someone who I uses money to almost, soothe themselves emotionally, and they will tend to have more credit card debt, they'll have a much harder time with the budget, and because opposites attract, there is typically truth to that. You'll see that person who grew up with trauma in the household, um, and not all the time, but typically they'll be the spender and they'll get with the saver and they'll be madly in love with the saver. And at the onset of that relationship, it's not that big of a deal, especially if there's no major debt. It's not that big of a deal. They'll get through it. 5 years down the road, it becomes a problem.
Mm.
So that's why it's so important when you're young, before you get married, to have that conversation, not just with someone like me, who has your best interests. You want to be having this conversation with a fiduciary, obviously, but also have the conversation with your parents. Like, hey, mom and dad, I kind of want to get this together. Can you guys give me any advice? Can you kind of open the doors to some mistakes that you made? Or maybe if it's something that you feel like you did really well, like what guidance can you give me? Because most parents aren't going to come out with that and give you that. But if you ask for it, it can actually be a really fascinating exercise.
So is that exercise to heal previous trauma, or is it to because I also get the sense that maybe our parents, and maybe this is different for you, depending on where you come from, you might be listening to this. And if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you're probably more financially tuned and you're actually interested. And as you're listening to this, you'd be like, ooh, I don't think they had this my parents had this whole money thing figured out. And if you don't come from a rich family, let a rich family come from you type thing. I kind of want to go do something different. So are you asking that question to heal those possible wounds, or are you trying to, or I should maybe call them trauma? I don't know if it's trauma. I think that word is overused, but like what's the intention behind that? To understand the mistakes that they made, understand, like I feel like that question in itself can open up so many like different kind of outcomes from asking that question, depending on how good your parents were with money. So I'm curious to where you're going with that exercise.
Well, multiple different things can be true at once. So one, I
Yeah.
think it's really good for your relationship with your parents
Mm.
if they're willing to reciprocate in that conversation. Secondly, I have found that you will understand yourself a lot more if you can understand your parents and where you came
Ooh.
from. So it's also a great exercise for yourself to identify. So first step is identifying your weaknesses, is understanding where they came from. And from having that conversation, a lot of times be like, okay, well, maybe that's why I spend money when I'm really upset and I feel better when I buy things. Or, maybe because my parents struggled so much and we never had money, that's why I hoard money in my bank account and I'm so scared to invest it. And it's preventing you from having compounding interest and actually building wealth because you're so emotionally addicted to that number in your savings account. You can't let it go. Identifying where it came from, in addition to maybe getting a therapist, um, can be really great for starting your journey. Thirdly, and one that might be addressed a little later in your financial journey, is I can build you the most detailed and beautiful financial plan. It will take me hours to put together. And even if you follow it to the T, and
Hmm.
you're just killing it with that financial plan. If you don't know where your parents stay financially, you're eventually going to have to end up taking care of them and derail that entire financial plan because elder care is expensive. You
Hmm.
need to know where your parents' finances stand and early as possible because if you do have to take care of them, I'm not going to let my parents go to some state run home. I'm going to take care of them. You need to save for that because that is going to be expensive.
That is such a good full circle moment. That's another thing. It's not about you, it's about who loses if you don't win, right? So thinking is selfishly of like, yeah, well, we're good would be not taking into account, well, there's other people that are going to depend on you. Have you factored that into the plan?
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
And no one wants to think they're not gonna be able to take care of them, and most people don't think that they're gonna live. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, "Okay, well, so what's the plan when you can no longer take care of yourself? 'Cause we are living longer, but not necessarily better." And the amount of times people have said, "Well, I'll just go back out and shoot myself, or I'll just jump off a bridge." They're not. They're not going to. Someone's gonna pay for it. So, save for it.
Who does pay for it at that? Because I'm hearing some crazy statistics. You're talking about people can't are living paycheck to paycheck. They can't handle. Maybe the number was around 50%. Can't handle $1,000 unforeseen spending event. Um, who's taking care of these folks and their folks when something
They will take your Social Security and you will end up in a state home. So a nursing home where they take your Social Security and they are not nice. They're not, you're not going to have a water view from your room or you're not going to have the best care. You know,
Hmm.
and that's where you end up. And so many Americans end up there. And I'll tell you what, if you go and visit one of those places or you volunteer there, you are not going to want your family members if you care about them there.
Hmm.
So that I mean, all the more reason and I have so many clients that do this. If you can afford to, especially if you're in that upper middle class or that upper level, it might be worth saving to help take care of your parents at that point, but you're not gonna do that until you know where they stand. So that's, again, another reason why that conversation is super helpful to both parties.
Got it. So, Kendall, you helped us play the game of defense. I believe defense wins championships, right? What does offense mean for you? I heard you say, you guys as a family had made some investments. A lot of us come from the world of investing. First, I was trying to make sure we had a sound foundation. But let's talk about the investing side. You talked about, um, you know, when we think of those who are investing, does that put us in the middle class? Do you find that a lot of people in the middle class have investments, or do you find that's more upper middle class? And what does that mean? Does it mean me investing $10 a month into an Acorns account or Beanstocks or whatever one of those apps, or
Hey,
like what
don't
is
knock
investment?
those.
No, I'm actually
Those are a
asking.
great place to start.
Or
Those are
is
a
that
great place to start.
yeah, but is that it? Or because when I'm saying that, Kendall, I'm serious. I'm saying, is it that is does that investing is that flexing the muscle, and is that what we want to teach, or is when we say investing in your world, is it just Ruben? You got to buy houses in cash. Like I want you to define that for our listeners, and definitely was not knocking them. I was trying to
No,
grab
no, no,
some
yeah.
names. I've
I was
used them.
giving you a hard time.
Yeah,
So where
there's
I
different
see
levels. Yeah.
people yes, where I see people usually start, and this is a great place to start, is your employer plan. There is nothing wrong with the 401k. I would prefer to see more people utilizing their Roth 401k. I would have thought that more people would have been doing that by now, but I'm still amazed by how many people don't even know that their employer offers it.
Can you
So
enlighten the
definitely take
difference for
advantage.
someone who's listening, just
Yes, of
while we're on this
course.
topic?
Of course. So there's a traditional 401k and there's a Roth 401k. Most employers offer a Roth 401k. When you put money into a traditional 401k, you get that directly dollar for dollar reduces your taxable income. So if you make $100,000, you put $10,000 in your traditional 401k, you are taxed at $90,000. That's great. And, some would argue that that's the way to go because when you take that money out in retirement, you'll be at a lower tax bracket and you'll be taxed at that lower tax bracket because you will no longer be working.
Hmm.
I, however, believe that you should be utilizing your Roth 401k over your traditional 401k for a couple of different reasons. People find that harder to stomach because you do not get that tax incentive. You will have to contribute that money to your Roth 401k after you've already paid taxes on it. But when you are retired, you take that money out tax free. Now, why is that valuable? Currently, the age is 73, that you will have to take money out of all of your qualified assets. So that is an account like a traditional 401k, a 403b, your traditional IRA. The government forces you to take money out of these accounts and pay taxes on it, whether you need it or not. And if you've done a great job at building wealth, that means that you could be paying a ton more in taxes when you are not working. I see that happen all the time. It happens with my own grandmother. Every
Hmm.
year we have to take money out of her IRAs that she does not need and she has to pay taxes on it. That's not fun to be forced to pay taxes on money that you don't need. With Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks, you do not have to do that. So that alone right there is a reason. So utilize your Roth 401ks. And secondly, a tool that I don't see enough people using at their employer is the HSA. That is a
Mm.
health savings account. It is available to anyone who has a high deductible health plan. It is such an underutilized retirement tool. So at 65, your HSA becomes a regular IRA. You don't have to use it for just medical expenses. Now, the key here is you want to be a healthy individual, a healthy family, make enough money to cover medical expenses out of pocket. And you want to keep great records of when you use medical expenses and you pay them out of pocket and you don't take it out of your HSA. A lot of
Mm.
times companies will match in your HSA and then you allow that to accumulate just like another retirement account. Okay. Now
You're
there
saying
is
don't you're paying out of pocket and you're not using the HSA. I just want to make
don't
sure I understood that.
use it. Your company will typically match in your HSA. You can invest a portion of your HSA usually. And then what happens is there is no statute of limitations on when you can take that money to reimburse yourself for those medical expenses that you paid out of pocket. There's no time limitations. So when you're in retirement and you want to take money out of your HSA, because you put money into your HSA, you write it off your taxes, just like the traditional 401k. It grows
Mm.
tax free. And now you're in retirement. You have all this money in the HSA, but you don't want to just take it out because then you have to pay taxes on it. This is when you use your receipts from when your kid broke a leg 25 years ago. It cost you 6 grand. You're gonna keep that receipt, and now that you're 65 years old, you're gonna pull out of that HSA tax free because you're reimbursing yourself for that broken leg 25 years
Oh,
ago.
so there has to be a reason, and there's no time stamp between. That's very
There's no
interesting.
timestamp. So now you have a triple threat. You have an account where you put money in, you got to write off on your taxes. It grew tax free, and then you got to take it out tax free.
Wow, that's I haven't heard that one. I like that. That's very powerful. Very familiar with it. Well, I shouldn't say very familiar. Clearly, I'm not, but I'm familiar with HSA. I did not know about the kind of double dip effect,
Hmm.
for lack of better words.
Triple dip.
Triple dip. Excuse me. That's fascinating. This is very helpful. I wrote down so many notes. Like this is crazy, so good. I could literally just have you here for hours, and I realize we've spent like three triple master classes. Um, what do you want? So as far as because I think originally how we got here is um what are possibly some folks doing right, which we talked about upper middle class as well. We talked about the biggest oversights as well, tools. um what did we leave out here? I mean, we literally covered all bases. One thing I would ask you is we start to talk about investments, and that's how we got here full circle. So this habit is a form of investing in your future self. um I know we talked a little bit about the other apps and stuff, the muscle. So these were huge oversights. 401k, HSA, Roth 401k is what you actually um advise us to do. What are the other type of investments that you think are um, that can get us there? And or possibly if someone's listening to this and it's like, well, great, but that's not going to be me because I'm investing, and maybe you have those conversations with folks who are still investing. I'm curious of what your entire take is on investing. Do you think that this is the foundation to build on, and then what else is out there for folks who might be listening?
I really love, so obviously investing in the stock market in some capacity at whichever level of risk is appropriate for you
Mhm.
is like the foundational. I feel like that's the first thing that you should do. You should have a Roth IRA, you should have a 401k if it's offered at your employer. You should be saving. I like to see at least 6 months of non-discretionary expenses. Add 3 months for every dependent that's in your household. Non-discretionary is an expense that you would have to pay whether you were employed or not. So,
Mm,
like your mortgage, your utility bill. I like to see 6 months of that in a money market or a high yield savings account that's purely for emergencies. And then add 3 months for every dependent that you have. That's the bare bones. After that, if you have the privilege of having leftover money beyond that, I'd love to see people investing in real estate. I'm a firm believer you might not hear this from every financial advisor because we get paid usually based off of how much money you invest with us in the stock
mhm.
market. I'm a firm believer in real estate. Before everyone dies, at least 30% of their net worth, I'd love to see it in real estate or some type of tangible cash flowing asset. I don't believe your primary residence should count in that number unless you are somehow utilizing that to cash flow. But I'm a big believer in the power of real estate. Buy dirt.
Love that. Let me ask you a question before we transition, and I want to make sure I give folks an opportunity to see how we can tap more into all the plethora of knowledge you gave us. You mentioned that I've heard this several times, and I think there's definitely a great uh, maybe there's two sides to the story. So I'm curious to see which if you see it the same way. Um, Definitely heard, rich dad, poor dad. Your dad's not your dad. Your home is not an asset. Your primary residence is not an asset. What's your take on areas where there's high appreciation, equity is built, they say equity is wealth? What is your take on I know you have some mortgages or you don't have some mortgages, or some houses have been paid off with respect to your situation, but what is your take on someone who's working, maybe has the 3 to 6 months, the 6 months reserves, 3 months for every dependent, and then they live in a market where their home has appreciated tremendously in value. Do you believe that tapping into that as a form to invest into other things is one way to go, or do you feel that people, and again, maybe this is me asking with the Dave Ramsey Foundation, that I know you not are tied to him, but have maybe some of that foundation there, or do you feel that people should really be working towards paying those mortgages off? So what's your temperature on that? If and do you still see that as a primary still being a liability in that sense if you leverage it for an investment? What's your take? I'm just curious because I see people talk about that two different ways all the time, and I think it's a very valid conversation.
It depends on the individual. So, like, if I have a client who's all over the place,
Hmm.
their finances are not in order, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and then they come to me and they're like, I want to take money out of my home and I want to go invest in real estate, I'm usually going to say no to that person. If
Mm,
you have someone who is disciplined, who has a 401k or, an investment account that they're diligently contributing to. They're taking inventory, they know what they're spending in their household because that's really what this you're asking is, I want to go start a real estate business. If you can't take care of your bare bones,
mm.
your household finances, I'm not going to be supportive of you going and starting a business where you're going to have to track expenses and overhead and ROI and gross revenue and
Which you're
costs
not already doing.
and you're not already doing for your family.
Got it.
Um, Now, if you have these things together and you come to me and you're like, all right, I'm doing these things, I want to buy a rental property, you have equity in your home. Absolutely. And you're not 62 about to retire. I think that it's a great idea, phenomenal idea with discipline, with planning. Where I have a problem with people that come to me with, which has been very popular because this is a very popular thing that you're seeing on social media, people talking about It's people that have no idea what they're doing or what they wanna do, who and then they just go take this money out, and now they're gonna go flip houses without doing the research on where they're gonna flip houses.
Mm,
Are they gonna do some of the work themselves? Or are they gonna hire labor? I mean, me and you both know the cost of labor right now is
yeah.
so high, and that eats into your profit
Yeah.
a lot. So, it depends on the individual, but if the right individual comes to me, absolutely, that is honestly probably the only way some people are gonna be able to do it.
Mm,
So,
mm.
other than that, taking out a personal loan, which I am not a huge fan of right now with where interest rates are at, or oh my gosh, what is a bridge loan, or what is the loan where you get a private investor
Hard money.
or a real hard money loan? Like, right now, I would say unless you're experienced in this space, right now might not be the best time to jump in headfirst into that
Yeah.
if you don't have everything else in order. But I'm curious to see what you think because that is your area.
Yeah. Oh, I can't tell you enough how many, because I do coach a lot of newbie investors, and you'd be surprised how often people don't know how to even underwrite a deal, which I'm glad to be at their service. But it's like, well, who told you to buy the last property? My realtor. And I'm like, you need to be close to the numbers, right? Your realtor should not be the person that dictates your future and a 30-year mortgage and a liability and the risk and everything. So I'm 100% with you. And I'm glad you said that. I think that's a phenomenal answer. It depends. And I think it brings the conversation full circle. Do you have, it's almost like putting the oxygen mask first before you try to help someone else. Like before you dive in to investing, I love how you actually put it into context. Are you actually in a good, sound position financially for your family? Like that really puts it into context. It's like, oh no, no, it's fine. I'm like sloppy. Okay, yeah, you're sloppy, but who is actually the ones who are going to hurt the most from it? It's your family. And so I think going back to what you're saying is you better make sure you have your ducks in a row before you think you're going to start a business and then think that's going to work out when you can't get your whole budget inside your household right. So I'm completely in alignment with you. And the way I look at it, I think there's many great tools in this space where um I think you need to be very um very conscientious with the types of neighborhood you're going to live in, where you're going to live, because look, at the end of the day, it's 100% that. It's like you might have a great income like you mentioned, and then you're going to buy that house because you think that's what everyone should be doing, is buying a house, and you're putting yourself in red again. And I'm seeing this all the time. We got homes here in Boston. You're not getting anything that's decent for under a million in this town that I'm in. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. And like, I'm just looking at it honestly, Kendall, and like we could have a whole other show about this. I'm like, okay, so you mean to tell me the average folks, and I know that like when we put into perspective and you think about the top percentile is obviously like you think of Boston to New York to California, this is not normal, right? Like this is like very expensive, high tax towns, great education, whatever, but there's a price with that. But when I think about the price that you're talking about, you can be I mean, I look at some of these homes sometimes. I'm like, okay, this is a $3 million home. Let me look at the mortgage payment. I'm looking at like 35, 45,000, 50,000. I'm thinking, okay, just knowing what we just talked about with what folks typically make, I know there's a good amount of those folks. I don't care if you're a doctor, lawyer, owner, practice, business, that are just they're scraping by paycheck to paycheck because they live in those homes. It's just there's don't you can't tell me otherwise, because the data would be so skewed. Like we looked at the numbers, we're talking about 500,000 is the higher higher upper launch, or and then we have 2 million, 3 million, 4 or $5 million homes. So I know that some of these people are living beyond their means still. And I don't know if you have a I'm curious to hear what's your rule of thumb when it comes to mortgages. Is it 30% of your income? Is it 25? What's the good
I
ba-
think maybe like 15 years ago, I would have said it was 30. but I would say I like to see your home costs below 40%.
That's crazy. Yeah. And then we're not even taking in food. And then if you
And
want to
no
see
one, I
something,
can't tell you how many people,
it's bad,
very
right?
few people are actually in that range.
Yeah.
Very few people. They're house poor.
Yeah. So that goes back to that. I don't want any investors to be house poor, and as a matter of fact, I actually want you to be renting where you live if you can. We've done it for a long time. We have multiple homes, and we still rent. We were renting when we were in New York. We did not buy because I'm not buying $1 million 1 bedroom home. Not happening. We were renting, so you can do that. And a lot of wealthy people do that. They'll rent where they live and own where it
Oh,
generates
I
income.
wish more people did that. I
Yeah,
wish more people did that.
yeah,
I mean, I know that doesn't, like, I personally with young children would not do that. Like
yeah.
rent, um, like where I live, there's not many rentals that are nice
Hmm.
unless you're going to be in an apartment complex, and that's not where I personally want to be.
Hmm.
But if we lived in a city like New York or Miami where you have supply for the rental market, like Miami, you can get a beautiful place and rent it.
Yeah, yeah.
And the amount of money it would free up for me to buy more rentals would be insane. I think that is there's like, it almost seems taboo or has a negative connotation to it, but the flexibility you get with renting, it has never been more expensive to own a home. For just my home costs in our home in this area in North Florida, it's about $15,000 a month to maintain our homes here. Like if I was renting, it would be zero
Yep.
to maintain.
It's insane.
So,
It really is, and I think that it goes back to the whole, um, it goes back to the whole what story are we telling ourselves, and I mean we could have an entire show dedicated to this whole what's next, what's this next step, like, go. And I'm all for, definitely. I'm not one that's going to say devalue school because I know a lot of entrepreneurs are like, oh, it's a scam, etc. No, I don't believe that. I do believe you build a lot of good foundations, but you need to look at your financial situation. I'm in complete alignment with you and say, does this next step make sense for me? Do I actually really need to drive this car, or do I just want it? Do we actually need to live here yet? Because we postponed buying our own home for a while. We were renting and investing. We had homes that we owned that we didn't live in a home. We were living in an apartment and we owned rentals. And I think just thinking of that, not just like, oh, you got married, now the next step is to own a home because that's what everyone wants you to do. I think that sets people back so far. Let's not even talk about wedding costs and wedding debt. That's another thing that people,
mhm.
I mean, the situation, the vibes. So, uh, my gosh, great full circle moment. How can you leave us? I feel like we needed to be tough a little bit today, but like what positive light can we shed to our listeners, or what message do you have for someone who's listening to this in 2025 as a key takeaway? I know we cover a lot today, but what message do you have, or a lesson, or an oversight that most people are overlooking that you want to leave with our listeners today?
Almost anything that you pay to learn is available for free on YouTube.
Ooh, that's good.
Make a commitment to educate yourself on an area in your life that you've been putting off because you're too scared or you feel too stupid. Make it a commitment for 2025 to follow the financial pages, to look up YouTubes, to read 2 books that will teach you how to take charge of your own wealth journey. And I know it's overwhelming. There's so many different areas. I mean, we've just vaguely covered 2, but maybe you just start with real estate, or you just start with investing, or you just start with, you know, I mean, there's so many different ways. Just learn the surface level and then dive into the areas that interest you most. You don't have to master every aspect of investing. You just need to be good at one.
Mm,
So find out which area that is that you're interested in, that you have a proclivity to learn more about and you're good at. Just find it, identify it in 2025, and then learn about it in 2026.
I love that. And I will say it reminds me of the this whole idea that, it may not be your fault that you never learned this in a household or where you're from, but it is your responsibility. So with that said, Kendall, cannot thank you enough for this just abundance of wealth that you shared with us, and lessons and insight, and we had to give it to the people straight. I'm so happy you were able to drive this home for us, and we want to definitely continue to tap into what you're doing in your community. How can we best be in touch with you? I know I connected with you on Instagram. What is the best way that folks who are listening to you and they're like, you're speaking to me, I want more, or at least want to get more insights, or at least want to be close in your proximity in your ecosystem, where do we go?
Definitely Instagram. That is the only one that I have the time to go on, at least once or twice a day. That's where I get a lot of, if I see content that I enjoy and I want to expand on it, that's where I start. Instagram is the best place to connect with me, to follow with me, to engage with me. And then from there, it would be, just good old fashioned email. But Instagram is the place to be. I know I'm not really into the whole TikTok thing. I think I'm
No.
too old to learn a new trick.
No, listen, it just takes one. I haven't mastered TikToks. Actually, matter of fact, I'm pretty sure our account got compromised. I don't know if that was a sign or not, but but definitely, guys, check out Kendall. You can hit KENDLCANN. That's Kendall dot Cann, but you should be able to just type in her name and you will find her there. That's where I found her. I'm so very grateful that I did, because you came and over delivered. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Kendall. And just like that, experimentation, we are out. Experimentation, I believe there are two critical components that will help you achieve your goals very quickly and succeed. Number one, it's information like this that you received on a show, in an episode, and content that you can find on my YouTube channel or anybody's channel. And then there's a community. And the way we've been able to expedite our process, the way people in our community, people that we consult, mastermind members, whoever, they get the information on an episode like this, but then they also have the support, whether it's me guiding them or being guided through a community. There is an opportunity for you listening to be able to expedite your process, or even expedite your results that you're seeking by being in part of the community. If that is what you're interested in, we at Experiment Nation happen to have a community devoted to helping maximize your occupancy and your profitability altogether, regardless of which market that you are in. And for that reason, you have an opportunity where you can go to experimentrealestate.com/submit if you're looking to work in an environment that can help you prosper faster. Call out any areas that you might not be familiar in, especially the blind spots. That's where a guide comes in hand, and I would be a pleasure and honor to be your guide. But in order to make sure you're a good fit, make sure you go to experimentrealestate.com/submit so that my team can go ahead and take it and see if you're a good fit to join the mastermind and the multiple programs that we have. In addition to that, I'm also now a YouTube partner, which means that I want to give you more access to information, more access to Q&As, more access to the questions that actually come out of our mastermind that help people expedite the process. We've seen people get anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 to $6,000 to even $7,000 a month net on just one door by applying the strategies that we use by working with corporations and furnished accommodation in a very strategic way. So if you're interested, make sure you also subscribe, because I'm going to have different tiers that's on YouTube now that we've become YouTube partner, to continue to be the bridge to your success in your lab. And your lab means your life, your goals, or wherever you're trying to head. So make sure you also hit the subscribe button on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/real estate experiment. We'll be there. You can also look us up at Midterm Rental Insurance Experiment. We will be there. Make sure you hit the subscribe, because that's when you'll know the tiers that are available to you that make sense for you, your marketplace, for your results. Remember, you're only one experiment away. Let's build.